What if fate decided to cross the paths of two people who were never meant to meet? A millionaire, surrounded by luxury yet trapped in his own loneliness, and a maid, scarred by life but carrying a strength no amount of money could ever buy. They come from different worlds, one made of crystal, the other of scars. But when their stories collide, something extraordinary is born. Something that defies prejudice, pain, and even the fear of love itself. This isn't just a love story. It's a silent cry about the power of faith, courage, and the second chances life offers when we least expect them. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss an episode, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to feel how far this story can travel. Because today, what you're about to witness isn't just a tale of love and redemption. It's a mirror of the soul, a reminder that the impossible can, indeed, become destiny. Angela Brown never imagined that fate would lead her to the mansion of the most talked-about man in Miami. While mopping floors in modest houses, she dreamed of giving her son a better life. Cleaning the floors of a millionaire's home seemed like her chance to change everything. Life often places opportunities where we least expect them, and this was hers. Richard Adams, the millionaire, lived surrounded by luxury but with a heart turned cold and empty since his wife's death. He had money, power, and prestige, yet no peace. The seaside mansion reflected his solitude, grand yet silent. Angela, unaware, was about to step into a world completely different from her own. When she first entered that house, she was struck by its size, its shine, its elegance. Everything was magnificent yet lifeless. She felt that something essential was missing, something money couldn't buy. The millionaire had everything, except the warmth that the maid naturally carried in her heart. Emily, Richard's daughter, was immediately enchanted by Angela. The little girl approached her with the spontaneity of someone who recognizes kindness and safety. Their bond grew quickly, filling a void that existed both in the child and in the house. The sincere affection of a maid was quietly transforming the atmosphere. Some of the staff, however, looked at Angela with suspicion. They whispered in the corridors, feeding silent judgments. Amidst all that, she overheard one of the guards saying something strange about Emily. The tone of his voice caught her attention and triggered an immediate sense of alert. Angela remained cautious. She knew something wasn't right but had no proof. The instinct life had given her was her guide, and she trusted it. Still, she realized that as a simple maid, her words would hardly be taken seriously. In that house, hierarchies were strong and cold. Richard was absorbed in his routine, distant and indifferent. He saw Angela merely as another employee doing her job. He didn't realize that her presence was already changing the atmosphere of his home. The contrast between the millionaire and the maid grew stronger, but an invisible thread of fate was drawing them closer without their noticing. Angela continued her work, quiet and diligent. In every corner of the mansion, she seemed to see beyond the surface. She cleaned floors but also noticed silences, gestures, and absences. While the millionaire hid behind business meetings, she noticed the loneliness in the little girl's eyes, and that made her even more protective of Emily. That night, the mood in the house shifted. The wind sounded different, the air felt heavier. Angela sensed that something was about to happen. She didn't know what it was, but her heart beat in warning. It was the beginning of something that would change the fate of everyone in that mansion. Richard Adams' mansion felt even quieter that morning. Angela Brown walked through the wide hallways, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the cold marble walls. The air felt heavier, almost tense. She noticed little details others ignored. A glance too quick from a guard, a phone hidden during work hours. The house, once merely empty, now seemed to hide something darker. While cleaning the upper hallway, Angela saw one of the security guards sending messages nervously. The man, dressed in a black uniform, kept looking around before typing. His expression betrayed unease. Angela, guided by the intuition life had taught her to trust, decided to observe from a distance. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, the kind that protects. She tried to act naturally, though her heart raced. In that world of luxury and appearances, a single misstep could cost her job. Still, Angela knew she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. Emily, the millionaire's daughter, was her biggest concern. The sweet, innocent girl didn't deserve to be caught in something dark. The maid could sense that something serious was about to happen. Later that day, Angela quietly approached Richard. She tried to explain what she had witnessed, choosing her words carefully. But he interrupted her before she could finish. His cold and arrogant tone made him seem like a stranger. He thought she was seeking attention, maybe even a raise. The millionaire, used to being in control, refused to believe that a maid could know something he didn't. The humiliation hit Angela like a blow. Her face burned, not from anger but from disappointment. She was only trying to protect those who mattered, yet was treated as if she were lying. Silently, she lowered her eyes and went back to work. The mansion, so vast and beautiful, suddenly felt suffocating. The loneliness there wasn't only in the walls, and it was in the people. As night fell, the tension deepened. The hallways grew darker, turning the mansion into a maze of shadows and secrets. The wind rattled the windows. Angela tried to focus on her chores, but distant footsteps and murmurs made her stop again and again. It felt like someone was watching from the darkness. Emily appeared before bedtime, tired eyes clutching her stuffed bear. She asked Angela to stay until she fell asleep. Angela smiled softly, tucked her in, and sat beside the bed. The child needed more than protection. She needed warmth. Deep down, Angela knew something was about to happen, and perhaps she was the only one truly paying attention. In the middle of the night, a noise in the hallway woke her. Rushed footsteps, hushed voices. She stood carefully, listening. When she opened the door slightly, she saw a man's shadow crossing the corridor. Her heart pounded. She recognized the same guard from earlier. Angela froze, uncertain whether to act. Fear and duty collided inside her. The mansion, with all its wealth and shine, now felt like the stage of a mystery. Something was about to shatter that silence. Something that would change everyone's fate. And once again, the maid's instincts were right. The next morning dawned tense. The mansion, once filled with quiet footsteps and murmured voices, now felt lifeless. Angela Brown arrived early, as always, but sensed something wrong the moment she stepped in. The gates were half open, and the guards exchanged uneasy glances. The silence that had once been merely uncomfortable now felt terrifying. A heavy premonition settled over her. Moments later, a nanny's scream echoed through the hallway. Emily was gone. The little girl's room was intact, but the blanket thrown on the floor and the window slightly open told a silent story. Richard Adams appeared seconds later, pale, eyes wide with despair. The millionaire, used to controlling everything, now stood powerless before every parent's worst nightmare. The police arrived quickly. Sirens, flashing lights, reporters, the house became chaos. Richard tried to stay composed, but panic consumed him. He barked orders, shouted at the guards, demanded the security footage be checked over and over. Nothing. No sign of Emily. It was as if the mansion itself had swallowed every trace, burying the truth inside its shadows. Angela watched silently. Amid the confusion, something caught her eye. A small pink hair ribbon, the same one Emily had worn the day before. It lay near the staff gate. Her heart raced. Without hesitation, she slipped it into her pocket and followed her intuition. If no one believed her, she would find the girl herself. Guided by instinct, she walked down the narrow streets behind the mansion until she reached an abandoned parking lot. The ground was covered with dry leaves, and the distant sound of sirens echoed faintly. Then she heard it, a muffled cry coming from inside an old rusty van. Her body froze, but her feet moved before her mind did. Angela approached cautiously, peering through the grimy glass. Inside, a small shape moved. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. A strand of blonde hair caught the light. Emily. The maternal instinct within her took over completely. Without thinking twice, she pulled the door open and threw herself inside, shielding the girl with her own body. The kidnappers reacted violently. One tried to push her off, another grabbed Emily by the arm. Angela fought back with everything she had, ignoring the pain. Every blow, every shove was met with pure courage. The maid's instinct was stronger than fear. She wasn't a cop or a hero, but in that moment her strength outweighed any weapon. The struggle seemed endless. Footsteps, shouts, the faint wail of sirens growing closer. One of the men ran off while the other tried to drag Angela away, but she held on, digging her nails into the ground. Blood trickled down her arm, yet she refused to let go of Emily. It was as if her entire life had led her to this exact moment, the one where she would prove her true worth. When the police finally arrived, the scene was one of sacrifice and bravery. Angela, bloodied but unbroken, held Emily tightly in her arms. Richard appeared moments later, pushing through the officers, unable to believe what he was seeing. Before him knelt the woman he had doubted, the maid who had just saved what he loved most. The millionaire dropped to his knees, speechless, before the woman who had forever changed his life. The sirens echoed in the distance as Angela Brown opened her eyes on the cold ground of the parking lot. Blood still dripped from her arm and pain throbbed through her body, each heartbeat a reminder of the fight she had just survived. Emily trembled in her arms, but she was alive. The air smelled of smoke and metal, the kind of scent that stays in memory. The chaos around them contrasted with the quiet peace that comes right after danger passes. When the police arrived, they found a scene impossible to forget. A wounded maid, bloodied, shielding the daughter of a millionaire as if she were her own. The little girl clung to Angela's neck, crying softly. The image was too powerful to ignore. It was the pure embodiment of something money could never buy, the instinct to love and protect. Richard Adams arrived moments later, shoving aside anyone who tried to stop him. When he saw his daughter in Angela's arms, his body froze. The man who measured life in numbers and contracts was suddenly faced with what truly mattered. The walls around his heart shattered, their eyes met, and in that instant he knew he had judged the wrong person. Angela could barely stand. The pain was sharp, but what mattered was that Emily was safe. When the paramedics tried to lift her onto the stretcher, she still held the girl's hand, afraid to let go. That touch was an invisible bond, born from instinct, sealed by sacrifice. The maid who had entered the mansion out of necessity was now leaving as a quiet heroine. At the hospital, the air was different. Cold, sterile, yet filled with gratitude. Lying on a stretcher, Angela stared at the white ceiling, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines. There was no fear, only exhaustion, and a calm kind of peace. She had never sought fame or recognition. She had simply done what needed to be done, what any mother would have done. Richard sat beside her in silence. He didn't know what to say, and perhaps there was nothing to say. For the first time, the millionaire felt small before someone who had nothing, yet possessed everything that truly mattered. Even injured, she radiated dignity, and as he looked at Angela, he finally understood what real strength was. Outside, the media swarmed. Reporters, cameras, headlines shouting about the hero Maid. But Angela didn't care. She only asked that they take care of Emily. While the world spoke of courage, she simply wanted to rest. Fame to her was noise. True heroism was having followed her heart, even when no one believed her. Emily, now safe, asked to see Angela. She entered the hospital room with a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. The little girl climbed onto the bed and rested her head on Angela's shoulder. The simple gesture silenced everyone around. It was love in its purest form, a bond born in fear, now blooming in peace. Richard stood nearby, eyes filled with tears. For the first time, he saw life without filters, without status, without power. The maid had taught the millionaire something money never could: the value of a heart willing to risk everything for love. Deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same after that day. The sun rose timidly over Miami as the news spread. The maid who saved the millionaire's daughter. The headlines blared across newspapers and TV screens. Helicopters hovered over the hospital. Reporters crowded the entrance, and the name Angela Brown echoed like that of a living legend. But she, lying in her white hospital bed, kept her gaze calm and her heart steady. She didn't want fame or glory, only peace. Journalists tried to extract grand, heroic words from her, but Angela always replied the same way: "I just did what any mother would do." The phrase, simple and sincere, cut through the noise of cameras like a beam of truth. While the world turned her into a symbol, she remained the same humble woman who just yesterday quietly cleaned the corners of the mansion. It was greatness disguised as simplicity. Richard Adams refused to leave her side. The millionaire who once ignored her now treated her with the respect of someone who owed his entire world. He spent hours sitting at her bedside, watching each breath, trying to find words that had never existed in his vocabulary: gratitude and regret. With every glance, he realized how wrong he had been about what truly matters. Angela, though still wounded, kept that same gentle smile. The hospital might have been filled with cameras, but she only saw one thing: Emily, who entered each day with a bunch of bright flowers in her hands. The little girl sat beside her, told stories, and laughed. Somehow, it felt as if their souls had met long before that day. Love, after all, needs no explanation. Outside, Richard's lawyer, Peter Lawson, spoke to journalists about donations, awards, and public recognition. But Angela declined them all. She wanted no fortune, no contracts, no titles. She only asked that part of the money be used to help other single mothers. While the world saw a heroine, she saw a chance to turn pain into purpose. Richard tried to convince her to accept at least a new job, a better salary, a house. But Angela only shook her head with that calm way that could dismantle any argument. "Mr. Adams, I've already received enough. Your daughter's life." He fell silent. For the first time, a man surrounded by power felt small before a simple woman. Weeks passed and the noise of the media began to fade. But something stronger remained, and respect. Angela's name was remembered not just as that of a brave maid, but as someone who reminded the world of the value of empathy. In a society obsessed with wealth, a humble woman had become a symbol of humanity. Even so, the past did not stay buried. The lawyer, driven by hidden motives, began digging into her history. He searched documents, old records, and found something he thought he could use. A mistake from long ago, a wound Angela preferred to forget. But her silence, as always, remained her greatest strength. Meanwhile, life slowly returned to normal. Richard, Emily, and Angela formed an unlikely but harmonious trio. The mansion that once felt cold was now filled with laughter, voices, and the smell of fresh coffee. The silent heroine needed no spotlight. Her light came from the truth and love she carried within, a light far stronger than any the world could ever shine on her. The days of peace began to crumble slowly. The once praising headlines turned intrusive. The questions now came with hidden daggers. Angela Brown, once hailed as a heroine, now felt the weight of public scrutiny. It only took one sensationalist article for everything to shift. Who really is the millionaire's maid? The headlines read, as if the world needed an excuse to doubt goodness. Peter Lawson, cold and calculating, was the one who planted the seed of suspicion. Pretending to protect Richard, he began digging into Angela's past. He searched through old records, spoke to distant contacts until he found what he wanted, a forgotten court case. Years ago, Angela had been arrested for defending herself against an abusive ex-partner, a story of survival twisted by the media into something darker. When the news broke, the impact was brutal. Social media flooded with cruel comments, newspapers changed their tone, and the same public that had once cheered now turned its back. The hero maid was recast as the woman with a hidden past. The judgment didn't come from a court of law, but from screens and gossipers who had never known her pain. Richard Adams, torn between loyalty and fear, found himself divided. He admired everything Angela stood for: strength, courage, truth, but the pressure was relentless. Investors called daily, worried about the company's reputation. Miami's elite whispered at dinner parties, their poison disguised as politeness. The millionaire who had faced real danger now trembled before prejudice. Angela stood firm, though inside she was breaking. She knew the world rarely forgave those who came from the bottom, especially a black woman with scars. She avoided the news, turned off the TV, and focused on what still mattered: her work and Emily's love. The little girl, innocent of adult cruelty, still hugged her the same way every day, and that was enough to keep her standing. In secret, Richard tried to protect her. He ordered Peter to stop the investigation, but it was too late. The scandal had taken on a life of its own. Angela never complained, never sought pity. Her strength was quiet dignity, and that silence was what haunted Richard the most. He couldn't bear knowing she was fighting alone once again. Then came Margaret Collins, Richard's late wife's mother, elegant, cold, and judgmental. She reappeared like a ghost in pearls, her words sharper than knives. She claimed that a woman with such a past could not stay near Emily. Her threat was clear. If Richard didn't end things with Angela, she would seek custody of her granddaughter. Her voice froze the air around him. Angela saw the conflict in his eyes before he spoke. She understood, and as always, chose the harder path. She wrote her resignation letter, brief and graceful, and left the mansion without a word. The wind was strong as she closed the gate behind her. No tears, no goodbyes, only the sound of the ocean and the silence of destiny changing course. That night, the mansion returned to what it once was: cold, vast, and lifeless. Emily's laughter no longer echoed through the halls. Richard stood by the window staring at the sea, feeling the emptiness of a man who had lost what money could never buy. The image of her, the maid with a soul of fire, haunted him more than any headline ever could. Deep down he knew her past wasn't the problem. It was the mirror of everything he feared to face within himself. Since the day Angela Brown left, Richard Adams's mansion had never been the same. What was once a symbol of wealth and power now stood as a monument to emptiness. The silent hallways echoed her absence, and even the sound of the sea, once soothing, now mocked his solitude. Emily wandered through the house, dragging her feet, searching for the woman she called her friend. The gentle, maternal warmth that Angela brought had left a void nothing else could fill. Richard tried to keep up with his routine, but work no longer distracted him. Meetings felt mechanical. Business decisions lost their meaning. The man who once prided himself on being relentless now found himself hollow, without appetite, without sleep, without purpose. At night, he would stare at the portrait of his late wife for hours, wondering why love always seemed to come wrapped in pain. Deep down, he knew that what he felt for Angela was more than gratitude. It was longing for something pure and real. Emily, meanwhile, stopped eating properly. She refused new toys, ignored expensive gifts, and spent her afternoons in the garden, her eyes fixed on the gate, waiting for Angela to return. The little girl, with her blonde, curly hair and sad blue eyes, clutched a doll wrapped in a tiny scarf identical to the one Angela used to wear in her hair. Sometimes she'd fall asleep right there, whispering Angela's name while the house staff watched quietly, powerless before her innocent grief. The maid's absence affected everyone. No one said it aloud, but they all felt the void she'd left behind, her calm presence, her kindness, her way of treating everyone equally. The flowers in the garden began to wilt, maybe by coincidence or maybe as a reflection of the gloom that had settled over the house. Even the smell of morning coffee seemed different, as if the air itself had lost its soul. Richard tried to convince himself that he'd done the right thing. He told himself protecting Emily was his duty, that maintaining the family's image was essential. But each time he saw his daughter fade a little more, he realized he had chosen pride over love. The mansion's walls, once covered in art and luxury, now mirrored nothing but his regret. One morning, as he sat alone at the breakfast table, Richard found an envelope waiting for him. The sender surprised him, Emily Adams. Inside was a small, colorful drawing of 3 people holding hands, him, his daughter, and Angela. Beneath it, in uneven childlike handwriting, were the words, "Daddy, I want us to be happy again." The note came with a handmade invitation, Emily's 8th birthday party, Saturday at 4 p.m. He frowned, turning the card in his hands. It was simple, but something caught his eye. A different handwriting, neat and careful, signed at the bottom, "With love, Angela." His heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of life crossed his eyes. In the days that followed, the memory of Angela haunted him more than ever. Her presence lingered in every gesture, every room. Silence had become his enemy, and guilt his constant companion. He knew that if he went to that birthday party, he would face judgment, whispers, and disdain. But somewhere deep inside, he also knew not going would be the biggest mistake of his life. When Saturday arrived, the mansion filled with movement again, though the air still felt cold. Emily ran through the corridors in her light blue dress, glancing out the window every few minutes. The sea glowed gold under the setting sun. Richard stood before the mirror, adjusting his suit without conviction, the weight of fear heavy on his chest. Outside, a simple car was approaching slowly. He didn't know it yet, but destiny was about to knock on his door once more. The day of the party arrived with the scent of the ocean and the promise of change in the air. The golden sun bathed the facades of Miami Beach while a soft breeze swayed the palm trees at the mansion's entrance. Emily ran through the hallways, her light blue dress twirling with each step, her smile slowly returning after weeks of silence. Richard watched from afar, trying to hide his nervousness. Inside him, a mix of anxiety and regret replayed every word he had never dared to say. When the clock struck 4, the gates opened slowly. A modest car pulled up in front of the grand entrance, contrasting sharply with the surrounding luxury. Angela Brown stepped out, walking with hesitant grace, holding a small gift bag for Emily. She wore a simple white blouse, a navy blue skirt, and her natural black hair was tied with a patterned scarf. Her heart pounded, and not from fear but from humility. She felt out of place in a world that had so often made her doubt her own worth. The moment she appeared, Emily ran full speed toward her, shouting her name. The little girl threw her arms around her neck, and their tears mingled as they embraced. The entire party froze. Conversation stopped, all eyes turned toward them. The reunion between the maid and the child she had saved was something beyond words. A living reminder that genuine love knows no social boundaries. Richard Adams stood a few steps away, watching silently. Angela looked stronger, calmer, more luminous than he remembered. When he finally approached, he tried to speak, but emotion caught in his throat. The guests were watching, and among them, an elegantly dressed woman, Margaret Collins, lifted a disdainful eyebrow and murmured something about the kind of company certain men choose. Her voice was smooth, but her words dripped with venom. This time, Richard didn't stay quiet. He stepped forward, his posture steady, his tone resolute. "You're right, Margaret. I do choose my company, and this woman is the most honorable person I've ever met." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The man who had lived his life for appearances was now defying the elite, publicly, fearlessly, and for the first time speaking from the heart instead of pride. Angela froze for a moment, stunned. The stares around her were sharp and judgmental, but Richard's voice cut through the tension like a confession. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I love her." The silence that followed was almost sacred. The lights of the party softened, the sound of the waves grew louder, and for a brief instant the world seemed to pause. Emily, smiling, grabbed both their hands and joined them together, as if she knew that simple gesture carried all the answers they'd been searching for. Some guests left. Others whispered behind crystal glasses, but none of that mattered anymore. Richard looked at Angela with a mix of admiration and tenderness. For the first time, he saw beauty in simplicity, greatness in humility. The gap between the millionaire and the maid vanished, leaving only two hearts that had finally found each other. Music began to play again, and Emily pulled Angela to the center of the room to dance. Their laughter blended with the rhythm of the ocean waves crashing against the seawall. Richard watched them, smiling faintly, the smile of a man who had found what money could never buy. What he felt wasn't just love, it was redemption. The man who once judged by status now understood that true worth lives where there is honesty. And as night fell over Miami Beach, the mansion no longer felt cold. The lights glowed warmer, the air hummed with life, and even the walls seemed to breathe again. Angela, wrapped in music and Emily's laughter, realized she had nothing left to fear. Destiny, like the tide that always returns to the shore, had brought her back, not just to the house, but to the place where she was finally seen for who she truly was. The days that followed that night in Miami Beach were intense. The love between Angela Brown and Richard Adams blossomed like something inevitable, pure, unexpected, yet surrounded by storms. Headlines changed tone. The millionaire and his maid splashed across newspapers with the cruelty of those who turn emotion into spectacle. Society reacted with scandal, and the fake smiles at elite cocktail parties turned into venomous whispers. Still, when they were together, nothing else seemed to matter. Inside the mansion, Angela's presence brought back the warmth the home had lost. Emily smiled more. The house breathed again, and even the sea outside seemed to shimmer with new light. But beyond those walls, the world refused to leave them in peace. Investors began to pull away. Contracts were canceled, and Richard's company stock started to fall. The image of the exemplary businessman was now tainted by his audacity to love a woman who didn't belong to his social circle. To him, every loss felt like a small price for what he had found. Angela, however, carried a different kind of pain, the fear of being the reason for his downfall. Deep inside, she worried that her love was a burden, not a cure. Some nights, she'd wake up and see him sitting at the edge of the bed, lost in thought, staring at nothing. In those quiet hours, she understood that the heart of a man like Richard bore scars money could never heal. Still, their love was genuine, built on glances and small gestures, the kind that say everything without a single word. The newspapers continued to label her as the millionaire's maid, as if it were an insult. Yet without realizing it, they turned her into a symbol of strength, courage, and faith. Letters began to arrive from women across the country, saying they found hope in her story. that she made them believe dignity wasn't determined by status. Angela read each one with tears in her eyes, realizing that even in her pain she was fulfilling a greater purpose, to show that worth has nothing to do with wealth. Meanwhile, the pressure around them grew heavier. Corporate boards demanded Richard distance himself from her. The media attacked relentlessly. He stood his ground, but exhaustion crept in. Angela tried to convince him to let her go, said it was out of love to protect him. But he refused. "No empire is worth more than my peace," he would say. And every time he did, she loved him more, even as the world around them refused to forgive love that defied its rules. Then came Margaret Collins, his mother-in-law, cold and calculating. This time she played her hand with precision. During a quiet meeting, she threatened him. If he didn't end things with Angela, she would fight for custody of Emily. The pain was immediate, like a blade to the heart. He pleaded, reasoned, but Margaret knew his weakness and the terror of losing his daughter. And in that fear, she found her weapon. Angela noticed the change. His calls became shorter, his silences longer. The warmth in his eyes was still there, but buried under guilt and indecision. She knew what was coming. And for the first time, she wished she'd never known this love, because sometimes love isn't salvation, it's an open wound. One cloudy afternoon, Richard appeared at her modest home, his eyes hollow. He said he needed to protect her, that everything was falling apart, his company, his reputation, his daughter's safety. Angela listened quietly. When he finished, she smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and whispered, "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll be happy." Then he left, taking with him a piece of something that could never be replaced. That night, Angela cried silently into her pillow. Outside, rain poured heavily as if the sky shared her grief. Across the city, Richard stood by the mansion's window, staring at the endless ocean, feeling the same ache, only distance between two hearts that still love can bring. Neither of them knew that the past that once united them was about to return. And in the shadows of Miami, an old enemy was waiting to strike. The silence between Angela Brown and Richard Adams had become an abyss. After their last conversation, words lingered like ghosts unsaid. He, confined in his mansion of luxury, tried to convince himself he had done the right thing. She, in her small apartment, fought to accept that love, and no matter how pure, wasn't enough to withstand the weight of society. It was a love amputated yet still beating, the kind that survives even when distance tries to kill it. The newspapers continued to feast on the scandal like beasts starving for tragedy. Headlines screamed the end of the impossible romance, and social media buzzed between pity and contempt. The millionaire had vanished from public events, and the maid had returned to obscurity. But the truth was, neither of them had truly moved on. The clock kept ticking, but time itself seemed frozen. Every memory, every smile, every stolen glance replayed like a film refusing to end. Angela returned to her routine, but her body moved on autopilot. Each house she cleaned reminded her of that mansion, the smell of the ocean, Emily's laughter, Richard's deep voice calling her name. It was like trying to erase a mark carved into the soul. Her heart told her that a love like theirs could not have been meaningless. But reason whispered that some stories exist only to teach, not to last. Meanwhile, Richard was drowning in a different kind of loneliness. He spent endless hours in his office surrounded by contracts he couldn't read. Emily asked about Angela every day, and he replied with hollow promises. "We'll see her soon, sweetheart." Deep down, he knew he had destroyed the only real thing left in his life. The weight of his decision ate away at him, and the mansion's silence echoed what he refused to say aloud: regret. Then fate decided to reopen old wounds. A new investigation began regarding Emily's kidnapping, led by the Miami police. One small, overlooked detail resurfaced. Messages exchanged between one of the security guards and Peter Lawson, Richard's former business partner. There was something rotten behind the case, something time had not erased. And among the evidence, Angela's name appeared again, not as a victim, but as a possible accomplice. The news exploded like a bomb. The papers rushed to publish Angela Brown involved in new investigation, The Past Returns. Richard froze as he read it. It was unthinkable that the woman who had risked her life for his daughter could be tied to something so vile. Yet fear of scandal, of exposure, of reopening old wounds, and held him back. For a moment, doubt crept in. Angela was devastated. She couldn't understand how her name had been dragged through the mud again. Cameras followed her, reporters shouted questions, and judgmental eyes returned to haunt her steps. It was as if life itself was testing her strength again. But unlike before, she was no longer the woman who stayed silent. She now carried the quiet power of someone who had already been condemned once and survived. Even wounded, she chose to fight for the truth. Richard knew he had to act, yet fear chained him. Every move seemed like a step into ruin. On one side, the lawyers, investors, and the suffocating expectations of the elite. On the other, his conscience, whispering that Angela was innocent. And amid that chaos, he realized the truth he had long denied. To love someone is to take risks, even when the entire world tells you to retreat. One stormy night, he stood before a portrait of Emily and asked himself the question he had been avoiding. What kind of father am I if I let fear decide for me? In that moment, he knew their story wasn't over. The separation wasn't the end. It was merely the pause before truth emerged from the shadows. As thunder echoed over Miami, he grabbed his car keys. This time he was ready to face everything, even his own past, were for her. The city of Miami felt suspended in tension. Headlines screamed Angela Brown's name as if she had committed an unforgivable crime. Cameras followed her everywhere, neighbors whispered, and the weight of prejudice once again pressed down on her shoulders. The woman who had saved a child was now treated like a threat. Amid the chaos, she was arrested, handcuffed in front of her son, surrounded by flashing lights and voices twisting the truth. Once again, the world chose to believe the most convenient lie. When Richard Adams heard about her arrest, he went silent. Not out of indifference, but disbelief. The sound of rain outside seemed to echo his turmoil as he read the official report. The evidence pointed at Angela, but something deep inside him screamed it was impossible. He remembered the night she risked her life for Emily. That woman could never do this, he repeated to himself like a prayer. But repeating it wasn't enough. He had to prove it. He took action. Hiring a private investigator, he revisited old security footage and combed through company archives. For days, he barely slept, barely ate, isolating himself in an office buried in papers, screens, and open folders. Every small detail felt like a clue in a maze. And then he found it. Coded messages between Peter Lawson and the security guards involved in the kidnapping. The dates, the payments, the instructions, all there. And between the lines, the evidence that Angela had been set up, a scapegoat for someone else's crime. While Richard pieced the truth together, Angela endured hell behind bars. The cold concrete walls contrasted with the quiet dignity she refused to lose. Other inmates watched her in silence. There was something different about her, a calm defiance that commanded respect. At night, she prayed softly, not for herself, but for her son and for Emily. Her tired face still carried grace, and her eyes, though weary, shone with the light of someone who believed truth always outlasts injustice. Richard, clutching the evidence, arrived at the courthouse in person. The press was waiting, hungry for scandal. But when he stepped out of the car, a strange hush fell over the crowd. The man once known for arrogance now walked with quiet determination, not as a millionaire defending his image, but as someone seeking redemption. In his hands, an envelope thick with documents that could change everything. During the trial, the prosecutor attacked Angela coldly, showing distorted screenshots and twisted narratives. Then Richard rose to speak. The room stirred immediately. He faced the judge and said firmly, "This woman is innocent, and I will prove it." His voice filled the chamber like thunder. One by one, he laid out the intercepted emails, the bank transfers, and finally the security footage showing Peter giving direct orders to the main guard. Silence fell over the courtroom like a wave. Peter Lawson was arrested on the spot. He tried to deny it, but the truth had already shattered every lie. When the judge announced Angela's acquittal, a collective gasp filled the air. For a moment, she couldn't process the words, until her eyes met Richard's across the room. His face was wet with tears and relief. He walked toward her and before everyone present took her hands. "She is the bravest woman I've ever known," he said, voice trembling, "and I love her." The cameras flashed in unison, capturing not just an image but an emotion, a confession pure and human. The audience, once skeptical, began to applaud. Some wept openly. The sound of clapping mingled with sobs. For once, justice had a face, and it was love. When Angela stepped outside the courthouse, she inhaled the open air like someone reborn. The rain had stopped, and the Miami sky had opened in gold tones of dawn. Beside her, Richard held her hand, and Emily ran into her arms, shouting, "Mommy, I knew you were good." Angela knelt, embracing the little girl as tears streamed down her cheeks. For the first time, she smiled without fear. The crowd cheered, reporters shouted questions, but none of it mattered. Angela looked toward the horizon and felt, deep down, that maybe God had never forgotten her. He had simply waited for the right moment to reveal the truth. And in that instant, beneath the clear sky and the gentle wind, she understood that love and justice, when walking side by side, are the most powerful forces on earth. Time passed, and with it came calm days. Angela Brown, now free, walked through the streets of Miami with new eyes, the eyes of someone who had walked through fire and learned to dance among the ashes. The scandal had faded, but the memory remained. Still, she chose to turn her pain into purpose. With the support of the Adams Foundation, she opened a community center in a poor neighborhood, dedicated to single mothers and women in vulnerable situations. The walls were simple, painted in shades of yellow and blue, but they radiated hope. There, Angela smiled often. She wore light, comfortable clothes, her natural black hair free, a symbol of strength, and her smile, the same one that once brightened Richard's cold mansion, now warmed dozens of hearts. Women of all ages came seeking advice, and she welcomed each with kindness, the same way she embraced Emily. "We don't need to be perfect to be worthy," she would say as she helped a young mother fill out a job application. In every word, there was the wisdom of someone who had learned that greatness lies in standing tall, even when the world tries to silence you. Richard Adams, meanwhile, had changed. The man once obsessed with control now walked barefoot through the mansion's garden, watering flowers with Emily. The millionaire had discovered that wealth isn't measured in numbers, but in presence. His once hardened expression now reflected serenity. He often visited Angela's community center quietly, watching from a distance the woman who had taught him the true meaning of love. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that endures in silence. The seaside mansion, once lifeless, had become a home. Angela now lived there with her son, Marcus Brown, and with Emily, who filled the halls with laughter like music. Marcus, smart and protective, helped Richard with his computers while Angela cooked dinner. The mix of aromas, rice, ocean breeze, and the scent of childhood, filled the air with life. It was a new family, born from pain, molded by faith and sustained by love. In the late afternoons, Angela liked to sit on the veranda, watching the sunset reflect on Miami's calm waters. Richard would join her, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Their silence was no longer empty, and it was peace. And when Emily ran into her arms calling her mommy, time seemed to pause. It was a love that needed no labels. It simply existed. The press, ever curious, tried to rekindle interest in their story. But this time, Angela and Richard chose privacy. There was nothing left to prove. The headlines were behind them, as was the fear. What mattered now was the present. The smiles of the women at the center, the quiet nights at home, and the certainty that God had rewritten their story. One morning, Angela gave a speech at a small ceremony in the community center. With a steady voice, she said, "Life isn't always fair, but grace is real. We just need to believe that even from ruins, a new home can rise." The audience applauded, and among the emotional faces, Richard smiled silently, proud. He knew she spoke not from faith alone, but from experience. As she left the event, Angela took Emily's hand and walked down the sunlit street. The wind played with her hair, and she laughed, light and free like never before. The sound of laughter mixed with the distant call of seagulls. It was the soundtrack of redemption, simple yet eternal. That night, gazing at the ocean under the moonlight, Angela whispered softly, "God places miracles in the most unlikely places, and sometimes inside wounded hearts." And for the first time in a long while, she felt that everything was exactly where it was meant to be. There was no more pain, only gratitude. The woman the world once called a maid had become a symbol of faith, courage, and love. Life went on, gentle as the tide, and among laughter, work, and hope, the story of Angela Brown and Richard Adams left a quiet legacy. That no pain is ever wasted when the soul chooses the path of grace and redemption. The story of Angela Brown and Richard Adams is more than an unlikely romance. It's a powerful reminder that even the simplest lives hold greatness. The maid who was once humiliated became a symbol of courage and faith. The millionaire who lived surrounded by luxury learned that true worth lies in the heart, not in a bank account. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. Love, when guided by truth, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds and turn pain into purpose. If this message touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Change begins the moment we decide to take action. So subscribe to the channel right now, turn on the notification bell, and keep walking with me on this journey of growth and self-discovery. Here you'll find stories that inspire, lessons that transform, and reminders that even on the hardest days, there is still grace and redemption for those who choose to believe.